Succession, the Crown Prince had to move quickly. On the 16th of September 1941, the plainly nervous 21-year-old arrived at the Iranian parliament and swore to reign as a constitutional monarch. Iran had a new king, and no one seemed more surprised than the new Shah himself.
He was like a child who is suddenly thrown into a stormy sea and asked to swim. So he had no time to think what was happening to him. He was carried by the events.
After the war, political life in Iran, stifled for so long under Reza Shah, returned. Nationalists vied with the Communist Tudeh Party for control of the streets, while the country's traditional power blocks, landowners, bazaar merchants, aristocrats and clergy schemed tirelessly to claw back the privileges that Reza Shah had usurped. As a constitutional monarch, the new Shah appeared to play no part in this power struggle. Behind the scenes, however, he was working hard to create a power base for himself. Hoping to mobilize the support of Iran's huge rural population, he started to give away the deeds of crowned lands to peasant farmers. These simple ceremonies expressed the Shah's ideal of kingship, a benevolent ruler giving and a grateful people receiving. In February 1949, an attempt was made on his life. 5 bullets were fired from close range. Though wounded, the Shah survived. This near-miraculous escape confirmed a conviction he had held since childhood.
One of the dominating characteristics of the Shah was his report that he was divinely protected and inspired by visions. He had very serious childhood illnesses, and he reports that he was saved from each disease by a vision which came to him at night. The Shah concluded that he was divinely protected and that he was kept on earth in order to fulfill a divine mission. That was a very important part. People didn't take it seriously. He believed it.
The Shah's brush with death concentrated minds on the succession. Despite the birth of a baby daughter in 1942, his marriage with Fawzia had not prospered. They had divorced in 1948. It was necessary to find a new wife and produce a male heir. Soraya Esfandiari, half Iranian, half Bavarian, was selected for the role.
After the divorce, the Shah was very lonely. Right away, the Shah fell in love with this fine lady. And especially after it was the time which she came to Tehran and they were engaged, she became ill. And apparently the first time His Majesty went to visit this beautiful lady, he had tears in his eyes coming down. They loved each other very much, I must say.
They were married in 1951. By the 1950s, the Shah was still ruling as a constitutional monarch, but was finding the role increasingly restrictive. He was conscious of the contrast with his father, whose body had been returned to Iran in 1950.
Throughout his life, the Shah was haunted by this vision of his father, and there were groups that had been excluded from power who would use him. He would come to tell him, "But Your Majesty, this is a monarchy. Remember your father. When your father was there, could the price of bread quadruple in a month? Never." He would go and throw 2 bakers in their ovens, and that would be the end of the story. This comparison was constantly there.
But even as the Shah tried to assert himself, a politician appeared who intended to further restrict his powers, Dr. Mossadegh. Jailed by Reza Shah, he now challenged his son over the issue of Iran's oil. Iranian oil had always been a British concession. In return for a percentage of the royalties, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, in which the British government held a majority share, had exclusive rights to exploit Iran's oil. By the 1950s, nearly 10% of the world's oil came through Anglo-Iranian's refinery at Abadan. Anglo-Iranian made twice as much in profits as Iran did in royalties. Oil nationalization was the issue on which Mossadegh rose to power. Unable to resist the wave of nationalist sentiment, the Shah reluctantly appointed Mossadegh Prime Minister in 1951. A bill nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was immediately passed. The British responded by withdrawing from Abadan and imposing a worldwide boycott of Iranian oil.
Mossadegh tried to bring Shah, young Shah, into the camp of the nationalists, knowing his resentment to the British, and create popularity for him.
But Mossadegh wanted a figurehead, while the Shah longed to exercise real power.
So gradually, in a struggle between the nationalist movement against foreign domination, Shah gradually shifted towards the foreign powers.
But the Shah was not strong enough to challenge Mossadegh directly. When he was stripped of his few remaining powers, he even offered to leave the country.
Iranians refer to the Shah as the suitcase monarch. That is to say, he always had his bags packed. He was ready to go.
All through his life, he would not stand against strong pressure. When there was no pressure, he was a very strong-willed man, but as soon as there was a bit of adversity, he would tend to bend.
But in Washington, President Eisenhower had become convinced that Mossadegh was about to deliver Iran to the communists. With the active encouragement of the British, he decided to play the Shah card. A plan was drawn up by the CIA and by MI6. The Shah would dismiss Mossadegh while a mob, funded by the British and the Americans, took to the streets to neutralize Mossadegh's supporters. But the so-called counter-coup misfired. Mossadegh's supporters flooded onto the streets, and the Shah's supporters went underground. The Shah fled to Rome with Queen Soraya. He appeared to have lost everything, but Mossadegh's victory was to be short-lived. 2 days later, pro-monarchy demonstrators, backed by army units loyal to the Shah, took over the streets of Tehran. Some of the crowd had Secret Service dollars in their pockets, but many were genuine supporters of the monarchy. Mossadegh went into hiding, but was soon captured, put on trial, and placed under house arrest.
The stay of the Shah of Persia and Queen Soraya in Rome was of short duration, for first reports of Dr. Mossadegh having won a victory were quickly reversed, and from the turmoil of Tehran, news came that the royalist coup had been successful after all.
For the Shah, 1953 marked a fresh start. The counter-coup had shown that the West was prepared to back him. But he was now also convinced that the Iranian people loved him. In a broadcast to the nation, he said, "Until now, I was a hereditary king, but now I am an elected one. You have elected me." But 1953 left a bitter legacy.
The military coup of 1953 was actually a turning point, because for the first time in a third world country like in Iran, we tried to establish a democracy. And it was Shah and his foreign supporters who killed the democracy in Iran. That was the end of his legitimacy.
The Shah's legitimacy was also undermined when the CIA began claiming the whole credit for the counter-coup, suggesting it was their dollars rather than the Shah's popularity that had brought the people out on the streets. After 1953, America became a major player in Iran, pouring in aid and military advisors, and helping to set up a secret police known as SAVAK.
The thing to do was to help him stay in power and see to it that he stayed in power. There was no sense in going through this whole exercise and then having it fail in that fashion.
But the Shah had no intention of failing. Dismissing independent-minded politicians and surrounding himself with compliant ministers and technocrats, he was at last able to start running the country in a way his father would have recognized.
When he come back and he see the love of the people, he felt that now he has to emerge as a strong man and he has to come as a leader, whether people like it or not. Since the people loves him, he has a duty for them.
The new start was symbolized by a new queen. Though the Shah was deeply in love with Soraya, they were unable to have children. the question of the succession again became urgent. Reluctantly, the Shah agreed to take another wife. The couple were divorced in 1958, and the following year there was a third royal wedding in Tehran. Farah Diba was part of a new generation of Western-educated Iranians. An art student in Paris, she brought a cultured, liberal influence to bear on her husband. It was to prove an immensely successful royal marriage, giving a boost to the Shah's image as a modern-minded monarch, injecting fresh thinking into the court and supplying the vital heir to the throne, Crown Prince Reza, born to great popular acclaim in 1960.
When I got married, I was 21. Of course, in those days, I never realized